Hollywood's greatest stories aren't always the ones that made it to the screen. Behind the glitz and glamour of Tinseltown's golden age lurked a hidden world of secret relationships and underground communities that shaped some of cinema's most beloved classics. And perhaps no film better embodies this shadow history than the 1950 masterpiece All About Eve. You might think you know this 6-time Academy Award-winning film about an aging Broadway star and the young ingenue who schemes her way into her life. But what if I told you that beneath its sparkling dialogue and theatrical rivalries lies a coded portrayal of Hollywood's secret women's circles? A hidden narrative inspired by real-life Sapphic relationships that the film's creators couldn't explicitly show on screen? The truth behind All About Eve reveals a fascinating underground network of Hollywood's most powerful women, actresses, directors, and industry insiders who formed what they discreetly called the Sewing Circle. This seemingly innocent name masked one of Hollywood's best-kept secrets, a community of women with same-gender attraction, navigating fame in an era when their true identities could destroy their careers overnight. When All About Eve hit theaters in 1950, audiences were captivated by its cutting portrait of ambition and betrayal. The film centers on Broadway legend Margot Channing, played by the incomparable Bette Davis, whose life is upended by Eve Harrington, a seemingly innocent fan who insinuates herself into Margot's inner circle before revealing her ruthless ambition. The film was immediately hailed as a masterpiece, but few viewers at the time recognized it for what it partly was: a veiled glimpse into the complex relationships between women in Hollywood's underground community. The origins of All About Eve trace back to a short story by Mary Orr titled The Wisdom of Eve, published in Cosmopolitan magazine in 1946. But while Orr provided the skeleton of the narrative, the flesh and blood that made the story so compelling came from writer-director Joseph L. Mankiewicz's intimate knowledge of Hollywood's hidden Sapphic world. Far from being just a story about theatrical ambition, All About Eve can be read as a coded exploration of same-gender attraction, jealousy, and the price of secrecy in an intolerant era. To understand how All About Eve serves as a window into Hollywood's hidden history, we need to step back and examine the unique social landscape of 1940s Tinseltown. During this era, the major studios maintained absolute control over their stars' public images. Actors and actresses were bound by morality clauses that could end their careers if they were discovered engaging in behavior deemed inappropriate, and non-traditional relationships were near the top of that list. Yet, despite these restrictions, an underground community of women with same-gender attraction flourished in Hollywood. They referred to themselves collectively as the Sewing Circle, an innocuous code name that allowed them to gather without raising suspicion. The term itself speaks volumes about the era's enforced discretion, suggesting feminine handicraft rather than the powerful network of influence these women actually represented. The Sewing Circle included some of the biggest names in Hollywood: Marlene Dietrich, known for her close relationships with women and men alike; Greta Garbo, whose private life was an open secret among industry insiders; Tallulah Bankhead, known for her outrageous personality and equally surprising relationships; and dozens of other actresses, directors, writers, and producers whose names filled theater marquees while their private lives remained carefully hidden from public view. These women created a parallel social universe within Hollywood, hosting private parties at their homes, vacationing together at discreet locations, and forming bonds that ranged from fleeting connections to lifelong partnerships, all while maintaining carefully constructed public personas that satisfied the studio's demands for moral stars. They developed elaborate systems to protect each other, using code words and signals to communicate safely in public and creating alibis for one another when necessary. And at the heart of this world was the kind of relationship that would later be dramatized in heavily coded form in All About Eve, the complex dynamic between established stars and the younger women who admired, pursued, and sometimes betrayed them. The character of Eve Harrington, the manipulative ingenue who worms her way into Margot Channing's life, wasn't conjured from pure imagination. She was inspired by several real-life incidents within Hollywood's women's circles, most notably the strange case of actress Elizabeth Bergner and a young woman who became fascinated with her. Bergner, a German actress who fled to America during the rise of Nazism, found success on Broadway and in Hollywood during the 1940s. Like many European actresses of the era, Bergner was rumored to have close relationships with women, though these relationships were never acknowledged publicly. During her time on Broadway, Bergner encountered a young fan named Martina Lawrence, who began showing up at the stage door after every performance. What started as seemingly innocent admiration quickly evolved into something more complex. Lawrence managed to insinuate herself into Bergner's life, eventually becoming her assistant and constant companion. She studied Bergner's mannerisms, style of dress, and acting techniques with an intensity that went beyond mere admiration. According to those who witnessed their relationship, Lawrence seemed to be trying to become Bergner, absorbing her identity piece by piece. The parallels to All About Eve are unmistakable. Like Eve Harrington, Lawrence presented herself as a devoted fan before maneuvering her way into a position of intimacy and trust. And like Eve, Lawrence allegedly harbored ambitions that went beyond simply serving her idol. She reportedly began seeking acting opportunities of her own, using her connection to Bergner to open doors that would otherwise have remained closed. What makes this story particularly relevant to our understanding of All About Eve is that Joseph L. Mankiewicz, the film's writer and director, was well aware of the Bergner-Lawrence saga. He moved in the same social circles as Bergner and had heard the gossip about her unusual relationship with her young assistant. While Mankiewicz never publicly acknowledged Bergner as a direct inspiration for the character of Margot Channing, the similarities were striking enough that many industry insiders recognized the connection immediately. But the Bergner-Lawrence relationship wasn't the only source of inspiration for All About Eve. Mankiewicz drew from multiple stories circulating within Hollywood's women's community, stories that spoke to the unique power dynamics that existed between women in an industry where female roles were strictly limited, both on and off screen. Another likely influence was the complex relationship between actress Tallulah Bankhead and her numerous young female admirers. Bankhead, known for her throaty voice and uninhibited personality, made little effort to hide her attraction to both genders from her Hollywood peers. She was known to take promising young actresses under her wing, offering them career advice, connections, and often close personal relationships as well. These mentorships sometimes soured when the younger women, having benefited from Bankhead's influence and connections, began to pursue their own careers independent of their benefactor. The resulting feelings of betrayal and resentment echo clearly in Margot Channing's wounded reaction when she realizes Eve has been using her all along. Bankhead herself recognized the similarities between her own experiences and the plot of All About Eve. After seeing the film, she reportedly quipped, "Darling, the story of my life." Her comment hints at how transparently the film reflected the real dynamics of Hollywood's Sapphic circles, at least to those who were part of that world. The character of Margot Channing herself seems to draw inspiration from multiple women in Hollywood's private community. While Bette Davis brought her own inimitable style to the role, the character's combination of professional power and personal vulnerability, her sharp tongue and hidden insecurities, echo qualities associated with several prominent actresses who were known members of the sewing circle. Beyond specific character inspirations, All About Eve captures the atmosphere of secrecy and coded communication that defined certain women's lives in 1940s Hollywood. The film is filled with double entendres and veiled references that might pass unnoticed by mainstream audiences, but would have resonated with viewers familiar with the hidden language of the sewing circle. The sewing circle was more than just a social club, it was a survival mechanism in an industry that demanded conformity. Its members included women at every level of Hollywood, from superstars to bit players, from powerful producers to anonymous screenwriters. What united them was their need to navigate a world that would destroy them professionally if their true identities were revealed. Marlene Dietrich stood as perhaps the most iconic figure in Hollywood's private community. Though married to director Rudolph Sieber, Dietrich maintained close relationships with women and men throughout her career, including rumored connections with actresses Greta Garbo, Claudette Colbert, and Mercedes D'Acosta. Dietrich's masculine-inflected fashion sense, her penchant for tailored suits, and her famous tuxedo scene in Morocco pushed the boundaries of gender expression even while her public persona maintained the fiction of conventional relationships. Greta Garbo, the legendary Swedish actress known for her reclusiveness, was another central figure in the sewing circle. Garbo never married and maintained lifelong relationships with women, including a particularly significant bond with actress Mimi Pollock. Like many members of the sewing circle, Garbo cultivated a mysterious public image that deflected questions about her personal life while allowing her to live with relative freedom within Hollywood's closed society. Alla Nazimova, a Russian-born actress who became one of Hollywood's earliest female directors, created one of the first sewing circle compounds, a Garden of Allah estate that served as a safe haven for women in the industry. Nadzimova's residence became famous for gatherings that allowed women to socialize freely, away from the prying eyes of studio executives and gossip columnists. The dynamics within this community were complex. Relationships formed and dissolved, rivalries developed, and power struggles emerged, all within the context of absolute secrecy. The women of the sewing circle might compete fiercely for roles during the day, then meet as companions or friends by night, maintaining a delicate balance between professional ambition and personal connection. These complicated relationships provided rich material for All About Eve, a film that, beneath its surface story of theatrical ambition, explores the multifaceted bonds between women in a male-dominated industry. The intensity of female relationships depicted in the film, both positive and negative, reflects the heightened emotions that often characterized relationships within the sewing circle, where professional and personal boundaries frequently blurred. When viewed through this lens, All About Eve reveals itself as a far more subversive film than it might initially appear. Consider the character of Margot Channing herself, a woman defined primarily by her relationships with other women rather than by her relationship with her boyfriend, Bill. Throughout the film, Margot's emotional focus remains fixed on Eve, vacillating between admiration, maternal affection, suspicion, and ultimately a sense of betrayal that carries all the emotional weight of a deeply personal quarrel. The famous party scene where a drunk Margot declares, "Fasten your seatbelts, it's going to be a bumpy night," crackles with the energy of suppressed feelings and jealousy as she watches Eve charm her inner circle. Margot's possessiveness toward Eve transcends professional concern, suggesting deeper attachments that couldn't be explicitly acknowledged in 1950s cinema. Even more telling is the relationship between Eve Harrington and theater critic Addison DeWitt, played with delicious venom by George Sanders. Their dynamic isn't romantic or affectionate. Instead, they recognize in each other a shared outsider status and a similar ruthless ambition. Addison seems to understand Eve in a way no other character does, perhaps because both characters can be read as coded representations of individuals navigating a hostile world through calculation and performance. The film's exploration of aging and female value in a youth-obsessed industry also reflects concerns that were particularly acute for women in Hollywood's private circles. Without the traditional markers of conventional success, marriage, and children, these women faced even greater scrutiny regarding their age and appearance. Margot's anxiety about turning 40 would have resonated deeply with actresses in the sewing circle, for whom maintaining their careers meant constantly fighting against both time and suspicion. Even the film's setting in the theater world rather than Hollywood itself can be seen as a form of coding. By displacing these dynamics to Broadway, Mankiewicz could explore these relationships with slightly more freedom than a direct portrayal of Hollywood would have allowed. Theater had long been associated with greater freedom than the more rigidly controlled film industry, making it the perfect backdrop for a story with subtle undertones about women's relationships. How did Joseph L. Mankiewicz gain such intimate knowledge of Hollywood's private women's subculture? The answer lies in Hollywood's surprisingly porous social boundaries. While the public image of Hollywood stars was tightly controlled, the private reality was considerably more fluid. Industry parties often brought together people from across the spectrum of society, creating spaces where information and gossip flowed freely among those considered safe. Mankiewicz was known for his sophistication and discretion, qualities that made him a welcome presence at gatherings where the usual strict divisions might relax slightly. As both a writer and director, he had a professional interest in human psychology and hidden motivations, making him an astute observer of the complex social dynamics around him. Moreover, Hollywood's golden age operated on an intricate system of open secrets. Studio heads, producers, and directors often knew perfectly well which of their stars maintained non-traditional relationships, choosing to manage this knowledge rather than expose it. This created a strange dynamic where certain truths were widely acknowledged within the industry while being vigorously denied to the outside world. Mankiewicz's genius in All About Eve was his ability to transform this insider knowledge into a film that worked on multiple levels. For mainstream audiences, it was a brilliantly written drama about ambition and betrayal in the theater world. For those who could read between the lines, whether members of the sewing circle themselves or others privy to Hollywood's secret world, it offered a rare, if coded, acknowledgement of their existence. The screenplay is peppered with dialogue that carries different meanings depending on the viewer's perspective. When Margot snipes, Eve would ask Abbott to give her Costello, The line works as a simple joke about ambition to most viewers, but it also suggests a knowledge of the casting dynamics that affected women in Hollywood, including those in the sewing circle, who sometimes navigated complex relationships with powerful women as well as men. All About Eve premiered at a turning point in American history. The post-war era had seen a brief relaxation of gender norms as women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers. But by 1950, a conservative backlash was underway, with renewed emphasis on traditional family structures and gender roles. The House Un-American Activities Committee had begun investigating Hollywood, and accusations of communism were often linked with unconventional lifestyles, a term that encompassed various non-traditional identities. In this climate, the film's subtle exploration of female relationships and ambitions took on additional layers of meaning. Its critical and commercial success, it received a record 14 Academy Award nominations and won 6, including Best Picture, demonstrated audiences' hunger for more complex portrayals of women, even if they couldn't fully acknowledge the subtext. For the women of Hollywood's sewing circle, All About Eve represented a rare moment of semi-visibility, when their experiences were reflected on screen, albeit in heavily coded form. They couldn't claim the film openly, but they could recognize themselves in it. Their struggles with aging in a youth-obsessed industry, their complex mentorships and rivalries, and the masks they wore to survive professionally. In the decades following the film's release, as social attitudes slowly began to change, All About Eve has been repeatedly re-examined through a progressive lens. Film scholars have identified it as part of a tradition of coded representation in cinema, alongside films like Rebecca, The Children's Hour, and The Killing of Sister George. The intensity of the relationships between women in the film, coupled with the historical context of its creation, makes a compelling case for reading it as a subtle portrayal of Sapphic dynamics in mid-century America. The legacy of All About Eve and the hidden history it partially reveals continues to influence contemporary cinema. Modern filmmakers exploring women's relationships often acknowledge their debt to the coded representations of earlier eras, recognizing how these films created a visual and narrative language for depicting female companionship at a time when explicit representation was impossible. The women of Hollywood's sewing circle gradually faded from public view as the studio system collapsed in the 1960s. Some, like Dietrich and Garbo, retreated into carefully managed seclusion. Others continued working while maintaining the public fiction of conventional relationships. A few, like Tallulah Bankhead, became cultural icons whose distinctive personalities provided a kind of cover for their identity. If you're already unique in every other way, your personal choices seem like just another aspect of a flamboyant character. The stories of these women remained largely hidden for decades, emerging only gradually through biographies, memoirs, and historical research. Even today, discussions of Hollywood's hidden history often encounter resistance, with some film historians dismissing evidence of same-gender relationships as mere close friendships or roommate arrangements. But the evidence is increasingly difficult to ignore. Letters between women like Garbo and Mercedes de Acosta reveal passionate connections that went far beyond friendship. Photographs show actresses like Nazimova and Bankhead surrounded by what were clearly more than just professional associates. And films like All About Eve stand as coded testaments to a world that couldn't be openly acknowledged, but nevertheless shaped the art form in profound ways. Joseph L. Mankiewicz never publicly confirmed the Sapphic influences on All About Eve. Like many creators of his era, he allowed his work to speak for itself, creating a film that could be interpreted differently by different audiences. This strategic ambiguity was itself a reflection of how certain women's lives functioned in mid-century America, visible to those who knew what to look for, invisible to those who didn't. The brilliance of All About Eve lies in this multiplicity of meanings. It works as a straightforward drama about theater life, as a meditation on aging and feminine value, as a showcase for brilliant performances, particularly Davis's iconic turn as Margot, and as a coded representation of women's relationships and communities. Each viewing reveals new layers of meaning, new connections to the hidden histories that informed its creation. Today, as we approach the film's 75th anniversary, All About Eve continues to fascinate viewers and scholars alike. Its sparkling dialogue and psychological insight remain as compelling as ever, while its subtext offers a unique window into a hidden chapter of Hollywood history. The film preserves, in amber, the complex dynamics of a world that left few explicit records, a world where women formed deep bonds in secret, navigating personal desires alongside professional ambitions, in an industry that demanded conformity while profiting from carefully controlled transgression. For contemporary viewers, All About Eve serves as a vital link to a past that was rarely documented directly. It reminds us that these hidden histories didn't begin with open representation. They existed in the margins, in coded glances and double entendres, in relationships disguised as mentorships or friendships. The film stands as testament to the ingenuity and resilience of women who created spaces for themselves despite overwhelming institutional opposition. As we continue to uncover and reclaim the stories of Hollywood's sewing circle, films like All About Eve take on new significance. They remind us that diverse narratives have always been present in cinema, sometimes hidden in plain sight. The Sapphic secrets that inspired one of Hollywood's greatest achievements weren't just footnotes to film history, they were fundamental threads in its fabric, influencing storytelling, performance, and characterization in ways we're still discovering today. When Bette Davis as Margot Channing delivers the film's most famous line, "Fasten your seatbelts, it's going to be a bumpy night," she's not just warning her fictional party guests about the evening ahead. She's giving voice to the turbulent hidden lives of women who formed deep bonds in an era that denied their existence, women whose stories are only now being fully told. And in that moment, we glimpse the true power of cinema, its ability to speak truths that cannot be directly stated, to preserve histories that might otherwise be lost, and to connect us across time to experiences both universal and unique. The hidden circle that inspired All About Eve may have operated in shadows, but through the film they helped create, they left an indelible mark on cultural history, a mark that becomes clearer with every passing year as we develop new eyes to see what was always there, hidden in plain sight on the silver screen.